You could say that the heart of nearly every coffee shop and cafe around the world is the espresso machine, and the highly concentrated coffee it produces is the base of nearly every drink on their menu, from Italian classics such as the Americano or Cappuccino to much more modern drinks such as the Australian Flat White or the American Iced Brown Sugar Oat Milkshake and Espresso. Try saying that 3 times fast. But I want to know, is there a way to recreate that espresso flavor without spending the hundreds of dollars necessary to buy a true espresso machine or espresso press? And today we're going to look at 3 traditional coffee makers renowned for their ability to make concentrated coffee and find out which one tastes closest to true espresso. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the 3 coffee makers we're going to look at today are the Italian moka pot, the Turkish jezve, sometimes also called an ibrik, and the Vietnamese phin coffee maker, sometimes also called a phin. Now, before I get brewing with any of these, I need to talk about a couple of quick things. First of all, I'm not going to use a purely traditional method of brewing with either the moka pot or the jezve, because if you grew up in those cultures, you probably don't know this, but for everybody else, they're renowned for having an extreme level of bitterness when you brew them in the traditional way. And today, I'm not trying to find out what these brewers traditionally do, but rather what they can do in trying to replicate that espresso flavor. And the standard for good espresso is nowhere near as bitter as what you can experience out of these if you're using a purely traditional method. So I'm gonna tweak things just a little bit, and I'm gonna show you as we go along. The second thing we're gonna do is we're gonna updose our ratios. You see, both the moka pot and the jezve brew at around 10:1. That's 10 parts water for every part of coffee, whereas the phin brews closer to 8.5:1. Right there we have a problem, because if you're comparing a weaker coffee to a stronger coffee, well, this one's probably gonna win. And so by adjusting and updosing all of these, we're gonna get to 7:1 across the board. Now, for a big picture comparison, brewed coffee is 16.5:1, which would be a 60 grams per liter recipe, and espresso is 2:1, maybe as much as 3:1. And at 2:1, that would be 500 grams of coffee per liter of water. By updosing to a ratio of 7:1, we're gonna be at 143 grams per liter. And that will both intensify our coffee concentration as well as make them more evenly matched between the 3. Now, the coffee I'm gonna use today is Kona Earth's Classic Dark Roast. The Classic is the grade of beans, and the Dark Roast is, well, a dark roast. I should clarify that it is Kona Earth's darkest roast, but this is far, far lighter than any coffee you would traditionally find used in any one of these brewers. And the reason for that is something I've covered on the show before. These beans have a lot of flavor in them, and so if you roast them as dark as the traditional coffees used over here, you're gonna just cook out a lot of that flavor, and you're gonna cook out a lot of your caffeine. Yeah, I think for most people, they would consider these beans to be more of a medium, though for a specialty coffee, this is definitely a dark roast, and that's why it's labeled as a dark roast. So you can see there's hardly any oil showing on the surface of the beans, which means they haven't been over roasted and are still gonna retain a lot of that natural flavor that you get from growing up high on the volcano on the big island of Hawaii. When you roast beans really, really darkly, especially a high quality coffee like this, you destroy a lot of the flavor complexity. Now, if it's a really cheap coffee and you don't have a lot of complexity to begin with, well, that's a good thing, because it adds flavor to the beans. And that is the traditional style of coffee that's used in some of these brewers. But roasting a coffee like this that has so much natural flavor and flavor complexity to that traditional level, you're just throwing flavor away and caffeine as well. The darker you roast your coffee, the more caffeine you cook off. So this is gonna be interesting, seeing how it reacts to these different brewing methods and filtration methods. I'm excited. So let me weigh out and grind some coffee, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we're gonna get started with the phin, because once you get it going, it's pretty hands-off, and we'll let it just finish in the background. The way that you brew this is actually really, really simple. You've got 4 parts to the brewer. You have a filter plate, you have a brew chamber, a gravity press, and the cap that also serves as a coaster for when you're done brewing. Just like so. So I have here 16.5 grams of coffee. This is ground at a 12 setting on my grinder, which is the same setting I use when making a iced pour over with my V60. So a little bit finer than normally with a V60. Now, traditionally, you would just shake out the bed and drop the gravity press right on top, but we're gonna leave it off for a few minutes because we're using coffee that is finer ground than traditionally. Because I have found with this thing that if you grind extra fine, you get even better flavor, but you don't over extract. Not quite sure why that is. I feel like it should be over extracting, but it just doesn't seem to do that. And you can see I've got the gravity press balanced here on the side so that when I am pouring water in here and then I eventually drop this on top, it doesn't add additional weight and the scale is already compensated for it. So we're gonna get our timer started as we add about 30 grams of water. There we go. And we start our timer. And then I'm gonna take this little guy. This is a needle distribution tool called a WDT sometimes. It just has a few little needles in it that you use to break up clumps when putting coffee in an espresso basket. And we're just mixing it all together so that we get a good extraction of carbon dioxide. We're gonna let it sit for 45 seconds and get all of that carbon dioxide out. Now, traditionally you wouldn't do this because you would just put the gravity press on top and then pour your water in. We're doing it in this way because the coffee is finer and it's harder to get the water to fully saturate the puck with the gravity press sitting on top. It's harder to bloom it properly and get all the carbon dioxide out so that then the water will flow into the rest of the coffee. All right, so now let's put that press on top and we top the brewer the rest of the way to 115.5 grams. Perfect. And then you just throw the lid on it and you let it sit. Traditionally, you should see the first drips in 2 minutes and the last drips at 5 minutes. But like I said, I can't seem to get this thing to over extract and taste bad. And if I grind extra fine, I get even more intense flavor. I think it also depends on the quality of coffee you're using. I'm using really, really good coffee with this thing that doesn't inherently have a huge amount of bitterness. So that does make a bit of a difference. If you're using really cheap coffee, maybe follow more of a traditional rule of brewing with it. And we'll just let it do its thing. Okay, next up we have the mocha pot. 3 basic parts: lid, water chamber, and you have the basket. These are kind of volumetric. You can't totally change the amount of coffee that you put in here as far as the volume. Depending upon the density, the weight for that volume is going to change. And I think we can get 25 grams in here to fully fill the basket. So that's what we're gonna do. And you don't tamp this down like a espresso machine. You just fill it up, shake it, spin it, and tap it on the side. Let it go down. You can take that little needle tool, break up the coffee clumps formed in the grinder to help it more evenly pour in and level out. Get the last of the coffee into it. So what I did on the other side is I put a tiny little mark in here that will give me the volume that I want. I want 175 mils of brewed coffee. And so when I get to that part, I'm gonna cut off the brew and we should be good to go. So I'm gonna try and just fill this guy up the whole way. I'm gonna rest that there, get my kettle. The kettle's gotta heat back up. So while we're waiting for that, oops, grab this guy. So this is a simple little camping stove. This is what we're gonna heat our mocha pot on. Now, I almost forgot to mention the 2 little changes that we're gonna make here from the traditional method. We're gonna first of all use hot water in the base. And what this does is it helps us bring the brewer up to temperature much more quickly so that we don't get too much water contact time with our coffee and over extract it, make it really, really bitter. Again, it's not that big of a deal with this coffee because you don't have that crazy level of bitterness that you would have with a traditional Italian really dark roast, but every little bit helps in making a delicious cup. And then the second thing is I'm using a tiny little paper filter. Now this is an AeroPress filter, but you could just cut one out of any kind of filter paper that you want to use. We're gonna put this right here on the bottom side when we screw this together. So I'll show you that. Let's put this together. I'm gonna put a towel down for the heat. I don't wanna hurt my table. Go all the way up to the safety valve. There we go. Then we drop our basket in. Then we're gonna take this guy and put it right there. Now it's not gonna wanna stay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna put a little drop of water on it. There we go. And then the wet paper will stick to the mocha pot and stay put. So then we put this on. And then of course, using a towel so you don't burn the daylights out of your hand. When I'm in my kitchen, I would just use my stove and it works great. For here in the studio, we're gonna use this guy. So I'm gonna get it started first. All right, so you just open up the brewer and what you're trying to do is bring it up to temperature pretty quickly, but not so fast that it starts boiling like crazy. What you wanna do is get to temperature fast and then brew as slow as you possibly can. So I'm gonna turn up the heat here. And you're gonna listen and you're gonna smell. So once this starts to put water through that puck of coffee, you're gonna smell the steam coming out of the top. You're gonna start to smell hot coffee and it'll start to sound a little bit different. You'll hear a hiss, you'll hear a change in it, so you can kind of blast the heat to get up to temperature and then immediately cut it down to stay right where you wanna be. I'm starting to smell coffee. So at this point, you're gonna look into that little tube there, and you're gonna try and see for when the coffee starts to come up, and right as it starts to rise, you're gonna bring that heat down so that it comes up and slowly just spills out. There we go. Okay, I can hear it coming up. Bring that heat way down. Oh, I can smell the coffee. It smells great. There it comes. And we're just gonna let it go until we get to our mark. And that'll give us that 7-to-1 ratio. Now you could cut it off at any point, once you know how to brew with it, you can do whatever you want, make it stronger, do whatever your preference is. I'm actually gonna turn the burner all the way off. Once it kind of slows down too much, I'll reignite it. And so the other thing that you can do is you can temperature surf by lifting it off the burner. There's enough heat in there that it's just continuing to brew all on its own, and it should take a few minutes. You don't wanna rush this. If you want really good flavor, take your time with it. I think that's the #1 mistake that people make. They try to brew really quickly with it. All right, so the brew is starting to slow down a little bit. So I'm giving it just a touch more heat. There it goes, picks back up. Getting kind of toward the end here. There we go, done. All right, so the last one up, the jezve, is typically heated until it kind of boils up to the top, and they scoop foam off and then let it go down and boil it again and bring it down and boil it multiple times to extract the foam that's produced off the top. We're not gonna do that because that will radically over extract the coffee, and we don't want that. So we're just gonna do it one time, and I have here our coffee that's very finely ground, 17 grams. Which again is updosed a little bit from the traditional. For this size jezve, this is a 2-cup size. You would normally go with 14 grams of coffee and 140 mils of water. We're doing 17 grams of coffee and 120 mils of water so that we can get a little bit more concentration out of it. A really, really good tip here is to use water that's about 60 degrees Celsius or 140 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe. There we go. Because you don't want to put boiling water in there, but you also don't want cold water because it takes too long to bring it up to temp. Mix up your coffee and grounds. You can also take a spoon and stir it as well. All right, so I'm gonna get this on, and then I'm gonna grab some cups because once this starts going, man, it goes fast. You want this to rise the foam to the top, no longer than 2.5 minutes at the absolute most. 2 is ideal. We're gonna put 1 serving into this one to taste black, and then we'll put the rest of it in here to pour out into our latte. So you just have to adjust the heat to get it to rise at the speed that you want. Not too fast, not too slow. You wanna hit your brew time just right. Just have to coax it up. There we go, almost there. Okay, we'll cut that, do this. All right, so this is gonna be ready to drink in just a minute, so let's get these other ones set up. Okay, so we have the Fiend, we have the mocha pot, and we have the jezve. Fiend first, it's been cooling for a while. It smells kind of fruity, which is surprising. Kona coffee doesn't tend to have a lot of fruitiness in it, but that is intense. It's got a fair amount of bitterness like you'd get from a shot of espresso. The only thing that's missing, it doesn't have the texture that espresso would have. But otherwise, yeah, that tastes like espresso that's had water added to it. It's not exactly the same, but man, I think this one might win in my opinion. Let's try the mocha pot. Very different. This is very nutty by comparison. I'm not getting so much of that fruitiness. It also doesn't seem to have the same amount of bitterness that this one does. I think espresso is kind of right in between these two as far as that part of it. I think this one could do with a little bit more bitterness and this one a little bit less. By comparison, they're both really lovely. Okay, let's try the Turkish coffee. That is quite different. Quite different. So that thick foam on top, it's not like crema at all. It's kind of its own thing. It's chewy because it has a lot of coffee particles in it, a lot of coffee fines, whereas crema is produced by that insane amount of pressure in an espresso machine, forcing all of that carbon dioxide that's in the beans into the liquid that's flowing through the puck. And so once it's depressurized in the cup, it foams and creates that really, really thick, luscious micro foam on the top of the coffee. This is totally different texture. Yeah, see, this one has a little bit of fruitiness and not a lot of bitterness. See, these two I think are pretty neck and neck as far as bitterness. This one's a little bit more bitter. Again, I'm not following the traditional rules with it, and I think it's good. I think it's really gonna work well in the latte. I think my favorite right here, black, is probably the Fiend. This one's really fun to make, and the mocha pot is too. But I feel like this one, the character comes through a little bit better. I just feel like there's more acidity, there's more bitterness, and there's more fruitiness. There's more going on here than with the other two. My preference would be the Fiend. It is the easiest one to do too, which is kind of cool. Let me make some lattes real quick. For sanity's sake, I'm gonna keep these in the same order. So we're gonna go Fiend, mocha pot, and jezve. And what I wanna do is use the same amount of coffee in all of them. Now, normally when I make espresso, I like to go with 15 grams of coffee in, 30 to 35 grams of brewed espresso out. We're gonna go a little bit higher here because they are less intense. So I'm thinking maybe around like 40. Okay, so 40 is gonna be our magic number today because that's what we had left over from the jezve. 40 should be fine. These are about 8-ounce cups, so it should be good. All right, and to do the steamed milk, I'm gonna bring out my little burner one more time. And this guy. This is a Bellman milk steamer. So it holds water in the bottom and it creates steam up here. And then you have a little steam wand to get steam out the side. Time to taste these. I actually want to start with the jezve. That's the one I'm most interested in. Delicious, sweet milk flavor. Really, that's a great taste, but just a little bit underwhelming. Maybe you could use a higher amount of coffee for that amount of milk. Here's the mocha pot. Now the coffee seems a bit more present there. Same strength, but this just seems to have more character, more flavor to it. I like that better. You really notice the flavor of the milk, whereas here it feels more like what a latte should taste like. Which is surprising because I felt like they were kind of even as black coffee. Oh, see there, that bitterness, that comes through in a really good way. It's funny because it almost feels like maybe the mocha pot is stronger. No, it's not. It's not stronger than the Fiend. The Fiend just has a little bit more bitter, but they're really even. So I would say if you're trying to do just espresso black, when you brew it the way I showed you, the Fiend, hands down, in my opinion, it tastes the most like espresso. But here, I think that the mocha pot and the Fiend are pretty neck and neck. You know, if you wanted more bitterness out of your mocha pot, generally I don't, because it feels like once you dip a toe in that way, you just get drug into the deep end and drown in bitterness and astringency. But you could try grinding a little finer, maybe brewing a little bit hotter, a little bit more aggressively, something like that, brewing with less water, trying to concentrate it even more. I definitely think that could work. There's room to play around with the mocha pot. With even strength, I think this edges it out by a hair, but I do think because you're inputting heat into the bottom of the mocha pot and you're producing a little bit of pressure to force that water through, you can extract in different ways than you can with the Fiend. You can use a finer ground coffee, you can cut it off sooner. If you use too little water in the Fiend, I fear you're not gonna extract very well because the temperature is gonna dip. It's a metal-bodied brewer, so it's leaching heat out into the air really rapidly, whereas you're constantly pumping heat into the mocha pot. So the way that we brewed them, I felt like was a pretty even playing field, give them all a fair chance, and I think the Fiend edges it out. And it is the simplest, the cheapest, the smallest. It's a great brewer, and if I was gonna recommend a starting place for somebody, I think the Fiend would be my #1 recommendation. These two are harder to use. They take more practice. They take more of a hands-on approach. You do need an additional heat source underneath them. That said, I feel like this one has a higher ceiling potentially than this one. So you can kind of play around with it, see what you like. Of course, the big question is, does it taste like espresso? Yes, it tastes like espresso. It's not the same as espresso. It's not as intense, it's not as strong. It's not going to stand up to the milk flavor quite as well, but it tastes similar, especially these two. They taste really similar, and I would say even this one, the reason why it edges it out is it has the most espresso-like flavor. So to me, I think that any of these are a viable substitute for spending the money on a proper espresso setup, which if you think about it, a several $100 setup should work better than something you can pick up for $20 or less. Whatever brewer you decide to use, go make yourself a cup of coffee. Cheers.